YouTube, welcome back to Unplugged with Alex, and today we are going to be doing biggest Dynasty off-season buys. Going to be doing some player profiles, as well at the end a list of guys and just some quick reasonings and prices as to what I'm buying them for and why I'm buying them. But before we jump into that, I just want to say please smash the subscribe button. We're almost at 100 subs. I want to keep pumping out content, and that's a big goal for me to get to 100 subs. So if you guys could help me get there, I would greatly appreciate that. So we're going to jump right into it today. I'm going to throw the first graphic here on the screen and just explain what we're going to go through, as well as you're going to see the first guy I'm buying. So first of all, we're going to go through the Keep Trade Cut ranking. If you do not know what Keep Trade Cut is, go on keeptradecut.com. It's a crowdsourced Dynasty website that sort of gives you a feel of where players are ranked. There's trade calculations. It's not the best website. I wouldn't use it as the end-all be-all. It gets a lot of love, it gets a lot of hate, but use it as a little bit of a baseline. It can be very helpful when we're looking at these sort of things. And then at that bottom, you can see that's their value chart on Keep Trade Cut. Then we're going to go over the age. We have the fantasy points per game in 2024, as well as the pick value. This is a mix between where I think the trade conversations start for this guy, as well as where Keep Trade Cut has them sort of ranked in terms of rookie pick value. And then we're going to go through the thesis for each player on why I will be buying them. So let's jump right into it here. As you can see, Trevor Lawrence is my #1 quarterback buy in Dynasty. Keep Trade Cut rank QB 18. He's about 25 years old, averaged 17 points per game last year minus the injury game. And pick value, I think the trade conversation start out would be about 108. As for the thesis on why I'm buying Trevor Lawrence, there's a new coach coming in. Doug Peterson's out of the building. Don't think he was being helpful whatsoever. Sort of seemed disinterested towards the end there. I think a new coach comes in, brings a better culture to Jacksonville, hopefully. And I think just as the team gets better, I think he performs better in fantasy. It has been complete dysfunction there. So that could help. Brian Thomas Jr. plus some other weapons. We have Christian Kirk, Evan Ingram, potential other weapons coming in the draft, but BTJ has been an absolute stud in fantasy. He's been a stud in real life. This is the first time that Trevor Lawrence is going to have a true weapon on his team, and I think BTJ could truly unlock Trevor. We saw them at the beginning of the year when BTJ was kind of, getting his feet under him as a rookie, but now that he has a full season under his belt and he performed phenomenally without Trevor at the end of the year, I think it'll be a big weapon for him, so that will help him in terms of fantasy. He's valued behind Kyler, Purdy, and Penix. Kyler I could see maybe, but even he's fallen off. Purdy I could see as well, but I think I'm taking T-Law over these guys. I think the ceiling is there for T-Law. He's young, he has the weapons, he has the frame, he has everything. So I think I'm taking T-Law over these guys. He's only half a year older than Michael Penix. Think about that. That's a little bit wild. Penix is a rookie playing well, but I still think I'm taking T-Law over him. Last year was a rough year for T-Law. I mean, the whole team and organization had some dysfunction, but he's under contract through 2030, I believe. There's one potential out in 29. Or he's through 2031. Either way, that's an outrageous time to be signed for. He's under contract. He's better than half these quarterbacks in the league. If he doesn't end up in Jacksonville, he'll at least end up somewhere else. I think you're getting a great return out of T-Law here, whether he turns into that guy we always thought he would in college or not. For the 108 or around that, we're absolutely getting a good return here. His likability is down. He came out and said, oh, football's not my #1 priority, but then he kind of, went back on his words. He goes, I absolutely love football. I'm not worried about it. I think it's overblown. Take advantage of Trevor Lawrence here for this price. Secondly, Dak Prescott, my second quarterback buy. Keep Trade Cut ranking of QB 24. He's about 31.5 years old. His 2024 points per game were 15.6, even though he did play 75% of snaps or less in 2 of those games. And the pick value, I think these conversations are starting at, is about the rookie 110. My thesis on Dak, over 20 points per game in 2023. Played phenomenally. The offense was buzzing. They are not right now. They have no weapons. I expect additions to that offense. It's really just CeeDee Lamb. Ferguson was not great this year, also had some injuries. We don't really have a true wide receiver 2 on the team. And the backfield is comprised of Rico Dowdle and the just left member of the backfield, Ezekiel Elliott. So we'll see if they add somebody there. I think the offense can be a lot more dynamic, and that will help Dak for sure. I think he comes back healthy and performs, but there is a Dak cycle. Like, let's take advantage of this cycle. You see it every year. There's people who love Dak and they hate Dak, and it just ends up going, oh, Dak's playing really well, let's all pump Dak up. And the second Dak does something wrong, everything tanks in his value. People start to hate him. Let's just keep buying and selling the Dak cycle, honestly, at this point. Again, expected additions to that offense. He's also signed through 2028. Still not that old, 31 years old. I think he can provide value to your fantasy roster for the price that it's going to take. So I am buying Dak Prescott. Send a late first and we'll take the fantasy points. That's really where I'm at with Dak. Next on the list for wide receivers, T. Higgins, my number one wide receiver buy. Keep trade cut rank of wide receiver 15, only 26 years old, averaged 18.5 fantasy points per game last year, and has, I would say, a pick value of about the 104. The thesis for buying him, I think we're getting a little bit of a discount based on the situation, question marks. We don't know whether he's ending up in Cincinnati or somewhere else. Regardless, I think he produces. He's capable of being a number one. He's young and proven. 18.5 fantasy points per game is nothing to bat your eyes at. That is very impressive. I think T ends up somewhere and ends up being that, Dynasty wide receiver 1 ranking. I could absolutely see it. Maybe trade A.J. Brown for T. Higgins plus. I don't mind that whatsoever. We're getting a couple years back off the age and maybe even better performance out of T. So we'll see where he ends up. Either way, I'm buying T. Higgins, an absolute stud this year. I think sort of on the brink of being a cornerstone asset in Dynasty. Pick him up before we see that happen. The next wide receiver I have as a buy, Josh Downs, one of my favorite receivers in the NFL. Keep trade cut rank of wide receiver 34. He's about 23.5 years old. Fantasy points per game of 13. Pick value around the 112. My thesis with Downs, he's been good despite dismal QB play from A-Rich. I've said it on this channel before. I'll say it again. I'm not an A-Rich guy. But was fed with Flacco. We saw that performed extremely well, and he passes the eye test to me. He's like a twitched up Tyler Lockett, in my opinion, just with better yak ability. I do love Downs. When I watch him play, I at least see it. I see the talent. I think there could be some situational improvement. Again, whether that's A-Rich getting better as a passer or them getting a new pocket passer because they're so sick of watching A-Rich throw the ball into the ground. I'm buying Downs. I think there could be some situational improvement. He's valued behind guys like Keon Coleman, Mike Evans, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy. Give me Downs over all these guys, hands down. So we're going to be going on to the next buy here. Naji Harris for me. A big buy, not the sexiest buy. Running back 29, about 27 years old. Fantasy points per game, 12 this past year. And pick value, I think those conversations start about the 207. You could see another guy we're kind of buying at rock bottom dynasty value from what it seems like. My thesis is he's a better real-life football player than a fantasy football player, but he's so cheap that we can buy him and, take the points we're getting for how cheap he is. He is great in pass protection, great catching the ball, great grinder on first and second down. He's just an overall good running back. These are the type of guys that NFL teams will sign to a second contract and run them into the ground. He has been very durable and very productive. He got memed on Twitter the other day saying, he had all those 1K seasons and people were like, oh, that doesn't really mean anything. I think it means something. If you could produce at any level like that, you are an impressive player. I'm buying Naji Harris. He's valued behind Tank Bigsby, Pacheco, and Benson. Give me Naji Harris over all these guys. I will buy for cheap, and I will take the fantasy points in my roster. Another guy who has completely fallen off after a wonderful 2023, he was the RB3 then, is Travis Etienne, running back 28, so right around that same Naji range. He's about 26 years old, averaged a dismal 8.7 fantasy points per game this last year. Very disappointing. I know a lot of people got burned by Etienne, and that pick value, I think those conversations are starting at, is about the 207. As for the thesis, sort of the same thing as Trevor Lawrence in terms of organizational dysfunction. I think the Jags were a little bit mismanaged in the coaching front this year. Bigsby saw a lot of the field, but I don't think that was the right move personally. I think Etienne is the much more talented player, and I think he still has the juice even though he did not perform this year. Even with some, little dinged up injuries, I don't see a way that Etienne has completely fallen off from last year when he was absolutely electric. So I'm taking the opportunity cost here for how cheap it will be to acquire Etienne this offseason. Give me the upside. Again, that 2023 RB3 status overall, not in points per game, but even then, absolutely phenomenal season from Etienne a couple of years ago. I do think he can return to that, whether that's with the Jaguars or somewhere else the year after. So in that same area as Naji, valued behind Bigsby, Pacheco, and Benson, I may be taking the shot on Etienne here instead of those guys, truly. So there's some upside to be had with Etienne this year. People got burned by him last year. Go take advantage. I think there is a good chance Etienne comes back and is a good performer for you on your Dynasty team. My only real tight end buy, and this isn't one that's going to be a big riser in the tight end rankings, but more so a consistent, valuable piece to your Dynasty roster. It's going to be Pat Freiermuth coming in at tight end 15 on Keep Trade Cut. Only 26 years old, still pretty young. Fantasy points per game last year, about 10. You could jack that number up in tight end premium, which I know a lot of people are playing, as well as myself. For pick value, I'd say the conversation started around the 212. My thesis, he was solid with Russ, still young, consistent floor on Freiermuth, and depth for cheap. He's produced at least not phenomenally every year, but he gives you some fantasy points each year. Somebody that you could plug in a lineup if you were, crushed by injuries or you just needed a plug and play tight end. This is a guy you can get for cheap on your roster. I can see 4 or 5 more years out of Freiermuth where he's giving you solid production, as well as if he makes a jump. He hasn't been in exactly the best situation in terms of passing game, but Freiermuth was a stud his rookie year, kind of fell back to earth a little bit, but I think this is a guy you can pick up, keep on your roster for a long time, again, be that plug and play guy. So I'm taking Freiermuth, buying him at tight end 15 all day long. So now just for some others that I am looking to buy or buying this offseason, but I'm not going to do a full player profile, is going to be Chuba Hubbard. For a couple of seconds, I think it's well worth it. I think he could stay in that area of a top dynasty back. Brooks is not going to be back next year likely, so going to be another big year out of Chuba next year. Wouldn't be surprised if he finishes top 10. Jacoby Myers, I'm buying for a mid to late second. Consistently undervalued, but consistently produces. It's the Tyler Lockett effect. These are the type of guys that you want on your roster. Just take the points. Rashid Shaheed going into a relatively empty room again, produced before he got injured this year. I think he and Olave are going to be the two main guys there. Give me the Derek Carr deep ball to Shaheed next year all day long for the back end of my dynasty rosters. Jalen Coker had a good season in terms of PFF grade. Not a ton of production this year, but definitely a guy that I would be looking to add for cheap. Dontavion Wicks, post-hype sleeper here. I do think a little bit, people got burned by him a little bit. They're like, oh, I'm not buying this guy again. The room is not great in Green Bay. I'm questioning Jaden Reed. I'm questioning Romeo Doubs. Wicks still has the juice, in my opinion, a little bit. Watch out for Wicks next year. I think third year maybe a little bit of a jump. Hollywood Brown showed some connection with Mahomes this year. Not sure. I think he's on a 1-year deal in Kansas City. Not sure if he's staying there or not, but I still think can be a productive player in the NFL. Again, for these prices, well, how would you not take the chance? Christian Kirk, another guy who got injured, but definitely can produce on an NFL roster, was rumored to about to be in trade talks before he did get injured. So could end up somewhere. Deontay, we'll see where he ends up. Produced like a madman when he was in Carolina this year, but then had that, a little bit of a meltdown. Not really sure what happened there. But again, for these prices, I'm taking the chance on these guys. Darius Slayton, somebody who I think is a better NFL player than fantasy player, but I think part of the reason of that is that situation in New York has never been good. If he ends up somewhere in free agency, look out for Darius Slayton. Could be a little value piece at the end of your roster. As well as Michael Mayer has been pushed down by Brock Bowers. Rightfully so. Brock is a beast. But I'm buying for a mid-third. I think I play the long game with Michael Mayer, and we'll see what we get out of him. So with that being said, these are all of my dynasty buys for this offseason. There are a couple other guys which I can, post some Twitter threads or I'll go throughout the year. But these are my main ones, especially those guys I profiled. They are honestly more of the type of guys that, I'm getting more fantasy points than what I think I should be getting for the price. They're not as much the dynasty risers that end up being in the top echelon of their position in dynasty. But either way, I think these are guys you add to your roster, and I wouldn't complain about the value. Take the fantasy points, as well as those others. I think it's some high upside, low cost shots. Those are the type of shots that I like to take. So thank you guys so much for watching this week. This has been my biggest dynasty offseason buys, and I'm looking forward to the next video. So thank you guys so much for tuning in.